The rain came down in sheets that November night in Bakersfield, California. Cold, relentless, the kind of rain that soaks through everything and settles into your bones like a prophecy of worse things to come. Emma Sinclair stood on the cracked concrete of her front porch, a threadbare backpack hanging from her shoulders, watching the door slam shut in her face. She was 14 years old. She weighed 93 pounds. And in her pocket, she had exactly $43 to her name. Through the rain-streaked window, she could see her stepfather Dale Harper's silhouette walking back to the couch, cracking open another beer, the argument already forgotten. Her mother stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, looking anywhere but at the window, looking anywhere but at her own daughter, standing in the rain. Emma didn't cry. She learned a long time ago that crying didn't change anything. The lock clicked. The porch light went dark. And just like that, Emma Sinclair ceased to exist to the only family she'd ever known. She stood there for 17 minutes. Not because she thought someone would come back. Not because she was hoping for a last-minute rescue. She stood there because her body hadn't yet accepted what her mind already knew. She was alone now. Completely. Totally. Alone. If that opening hooked you, trust me, this story only gets more intense. Subscribe now for more incredible true stories of courage and transformation, and hit that notification bell. Now, let me take you back to where it all began and show you how this abandoned 14-year-old girl became the shooter that Navy SEALs would one day wait on for their trigger pull. The first night was the hardest. Emma walked 6 blocks in the rain before she found a Sunrise laundromat on Chester Avenue. It was open 24 hours, the fluorescent lights humming that particular frequency that made everything feel both too bright and somehow dim at the same time. The heat from the dryers hit her like a wall when she pushed through the glass door, and for a moment, just a moment, she almost broke down. But there were people inside. A woman folding clothes in the corner. A man reading a newspaper near the vending machines. People who would see her. People who might ask questions. So Emma found a plastic chair in the back corner, tucked herself into the smallest possible space, and pretended to wait for a dryer that wasn't hers. She didn't sleep that first night. She watched. She listened. She learned. The laundromat closed for cleaning between 3 and 5 in the morning, which meant she had to be gone by 2:45. The overnight clerk was a heavy-set man named Marcus, who didn't ask questions as long as you looked like you belonged. The bathroom had a lock that actually worked, and the hot water ran for exactly 4 minutes before cutting off. By the third night, Emma had the rhythm down. The bus shelter on Golden State Avenue became her backup location, a bench with a partial roof that kept most of the rain off. She learned to sleep in 90-minute intervals. Her backpack clutched her chest, one eye always half open for the headlights of approaching cars. Week 1 became week 2. Week 2 became a month. Emma Sinclair was surviving, but survival was a full-time job that left no room for anything else. School became impossible. She'd been enrolled at East Bakersfield High, but showing up with the same clothes 3 days in a row, hair unwashed, bags under her eyes, invited questions she couldn't answer. So she stopped going. Instead, she learned the economy of the streets. The diner on 24th Street would let her wash dishes in the back for $40 cash. No questions asked. The owner was a grizzled Greek man named Stavros who never smiled but always made sure she ate before she left. 2 shifts a week kept her fed. Barely. The gas station on the corner sold day-old pastries for 50 cents after 7 p.m. The public library was warm and had bathrooms and didn't kick you out until closing time. The abandoned apartment complex on Union Avenue had a second-floor unit with a door that didn't quite latch. Dangerous, but dry when the rain came back. Emma learned that the most valuable skill in homelessness wasn't strength or speed. It was stillness, the ability to become invisible, to fold yourself into a corner and stop existing, to control your breathing, your movement, your very presence until people's eyes slid right over you like you were part of furniture. When you're a 14-year-old girl alone on the streets, attention is the enemy. So Emma became a ghost. She learned to read body language, to spot the difference between someone who might help and someone who was hunting. She learned to trust her instincts, that animal part of her brain that screamed warnings before her conscious mind caught up. She learned that hesitation could cost you everything. 3 months into her new life, Emma had her first real confrontation. It was 2:17 in the morning. She was cutting through the alley behind a laundromat, taking her usual shortcut to the bus shelter, when she heard footsteps behind her. Two men, mid-20s, the smell of cheap whiskey reaching her before they did. Emma's hand went to the folding pocket knife in her jacket. 3-inch blade. Stavros had given it to her after the second week, pressed it into her palm without a word, his eyes saying everything his mouth didn't. The men were talking to each other, laughing about something, but their trajectory was wrong. They weren't just walking. They were following. Emma didn't run. Running triggered pursuit instinct. Running made you pray. Instead, she did something that surprised even herself. She stopped. She turned around. She looked at them, not with fear, not with challenge, but with absolute, complete stillness, the stillness of someone who has already accepted every possible outcome and found peace with all of them. The men slowed. The laughter died. Something about the way she stood there, 93 pounds of nothing in a worn jacket, holding their gaze without flinching. Something about that made them uncomfortable. Never mind, one of them muttered. Wrong one. They turned. They left. Emma waited until they were out of sight, then walked the remaining 3 blocks to the bus shelter on legs that only started shaking when she sat down. She didn't sleep that night either, but she had learned something invaluable. Stillness wasn't just survival. Stillness was power. The gun range appeared in Emma's life like an accident, but nothing in her life was accidental anymore. She had learned that lesson the hard way. It was her 4th month on the streets, and she was walking the back roads outside Bakersfield to avoid the police sweeps downtown. The desert stretched out around her, brown and endless, the kind of emptiness that swallowed sound and made you feel like the last person on earth. She heard the gunshots before she saw the property, the distinctive crack of rifle fire echoing across the flatland. Something about that sound pulled at her. Not fear, curiosity. The range was nothing fancy. A corrugated metal shed, a series of targets at various distances, painted on old refrigerator doors and car panels. A single pickup truck parked in the dirt, and a man. He was in his 60s, maybe older, with the kind of leathered skin that came from decades of sun and hard living. Gray hair cut military short. A bearing that said he'd spent a lifetime being told where to stand and had finally earned the right to stand wherever he damn well pleased. He noticed her watching from the road. Of course he did. Men like that noticed everything, but he didn't approach, didn't wave her over, didn't chase her off. He just kept shooting. Emma watched for 47 minutes. She counted the shots, watched his breathing, noticed the way he adjusted between each round, making micro corrections she couldn't understand but somehow recognized as significant. When he finally lowered the rifle, he looked directly at her. You gonna stand there all day, or are you gonna come see what you're looking at? His voice was rough, like gravel in a coffee grinder. Emma should have run. Every survival instinct she developed screamed at her to disappear, to fade back into the desert, to trust no one. But something in his tone, something in the complete absence of threat, made her walk forward instead. She stopped at the property line. What are you shooting at? She asked. Targets, he said. 100 yards out, 200, 300, depending on what I feel like. Why? The man tilted his head, studying her with eyes that had seen things she couldn't imagine. Why do you care? Emma didn't have an answer for that, at least not one she could put into words. He grunted. Name's Jack Morrison. 24 years, United States Marine Corps. Retired now, but the Corps don't retire from you. He gestured at the property around him. This is my range, my land. You're trespassing. I'll go, Emma said, already stepping back. Didn't say you had to. Jack Morrison set down the rifle, a Remington 700 bolt action, though Emma wouldn't learn that name for another week, and walked toward his truck. Got water in the cooler. You look like you need some. It was 92 degrees in the shade, and Emma hadn't had anything to drink since the library water fountain that morning. She hesitated. Kid, if I wanted to hurt you, I could have done it from 100 yards while you were standing on the road staring at me like a lost dog. Come get some water. Then you can tell me why a teenage girl is wandering the desert alone, looking like she hasn't slept in a month. That was the beginning. Jack Morrison didn't ask about her living situation. Not directly. He was smarter than that, more patient. He let her talk when she wanted to talk, which wasn't often, and filled the silence with his own stories when she didn't. 24 years in the Marines. Combat deployments to places he still couldn't name. A wife who died of cancer in 2003. A son who'd stopped talking to him after the divorce. I'm not a good man, Jack told her on her third visit to the range. Never pretended to be. But I know what broken looks like, and I know what strong looks like. You got both, kid. Question is which one wins. Emma didn't know how to respond to that, so she didn't. Instead, she asked, "Can you teach me to shoot?" Jack Morrison looked at her for a long time. The kind of look that weighed everything. Her age, her circumstances, the potential consequences of putting a weapon in the hands of a homeless teenager. Why do you want to learn? Emma thought about the alley, the two men, the way her hand had gone to knife and found it laughably inadequate, the way stillness had saved her that time, but might not save her the next. Because I never want to be helpless again. Jack nodded slowly. Okay, he said, but we do this my way. No arguments. No shortcuts. You learn the right way or you don't learn at all. Yes, sir. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Don't call me sir. I work for a living. He handed her a .22 rifle. Small caliber. Training weapon. The kind of gun that wouldn't knock her over if she held it wrong, but would still teach her everything she needed to know about breathing, stability, and trigger discipline. First lesson, Jack said. The weapon doesn't know who you are. It doesn't care if you're a 14-year-old girl or a 40-year-old man. It only responds to inputs. Your breathing, your heartbeat, your focus. You control those, you control where the bullet goes. Emma raised a rifle to her shoulder, mimicking the stance she'd watched him use. No, Jack said. Your shoulder is too tense. You're gripping with your hand instead of your shoulder pocket, and you're holding your breath wrong. I didn't know there was a right way to hold your breath. There is. Inhale, exhale half. Hold. Fire during the natural pause between heartbeats. Your body has a rhythm. Learn it. Use it. Emma tried again. Better, Jack said, but you're anticipating the recoil. You're flinching before the shot, which means you're moving the barrel before the bullet leaves. Fire the rifle. Don't fire at the target. Let the target happen. That doesn't make sense. It will. They worked for 3 hours that first day. Emma's shoulder was bruised by the end, her arms shaking from holding the rifle up, her ears ringing despite the foam plugs Jack had given her. But she had put 7 out of 10 rounds in a 6-inch circle at 50 yards. Not bad, Jack said, which Emma would later learn was the highest praise he ever gave. She came back the next day, and the day after that, and every day she could manage for the next 16 months. Jack never asked where she slept. Never asked about school, never asked about her family, or why a girl her age was wandering the California desert with a backpack and a haunted look in her eyes. But he started leaving food in his truck, sandwiches, fruit, water bottles, always positioned where she could take them without having to ask, without having to acknowledge the transaction. He gave her a sleeping bag when the nights got cold, told her it was surplus, taking up space. He'd just throw it out if she didn't want it. He didn't throw anything out. Emma knew that, but she took the sleeping bag anyway. And slowly, over months of early mornings and endless repetitions, she started to become something other than a victim. The progression from .22 to Remington 700 happened at the 8-month mark. Emma remembered the exact moment because it was the first time Jack Morrison used a word that would define her career. You go still, he said, watching herself behind a bolt-action rifle for the first time. Most people, they try to force their body into position, fight against their own heartbeat. You don't do that. You just go still. That's rare, kid. That's very rare. The Remington 700 was a different beast than the .22. Heavier, more powerful. The recoil would leave her shoulder aching for days at first. But the fundamentals were the same. Breathing, stability, trigger discipline, the natural pause between heartbeats. Jack moved her to the 300-yard line. At that distance, the target looked impossibly small, a paper silhouette that seemed to waver in the heat rising from the desert floor. The wind was light, maybe 8 miles per hour from the east, but at 300 yards, 8 miles per hour was enough to push a bullet several inches off target. Windage, Jack said, your new best friend and worst enemy. You can calculate it or you can feel it. Best shooters do both. How do you feel wind? Watch the grass. Watch the mirage. Watch the way the air bends the light above the ground. Everything tells you something if you know how to listen. Emma lay prone behind the rifle, her cheek pressed against the stock, her eye aligned with the scope. The crosshairs settled on center mass of the silhouette 3 football fields away. She inhaled, exhaled half, held, and in the space between heartbeats, she squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The report echoed across the desert, and through the scope, she watched the hole appear exactly where she'd aimed, center mass, 2 inches left of the spine. Again, Jack said. She fired again. Same result. By the end of that session, Emma had put 8 rounds into a 4-inch group at 300 yards. Not competition shooting, not sniper qualified. But for a 15-year-old with 8 months of training, it was exceptional. Jack drove her back to the edge of town that evening, a ritual they developed, his way of making sure she got somewhere safe without directly acknowledging that she had nowhere to go. He stopped the truck at their usual drop point, but this time he didn't let her get out immediately. "Kid," he said, staring out the windshield at the dying light, "I've trained Marines. I've trained special operations candidates. I've seen every kind of shooter there is, from the ones who burn out to the ones who go all the way." He turned to look at her. "You've got something I've only seen a handful of times in my life. A gift, a curse. I don't know which yet. But whatever it is, it's not something that can be taught." Emma didn't know what to say. "You're 16 in a few months," Jack continued. "What's your plan?" "I don't have a plan. That's not good enough. Not for someone like you. What am I supposed to do? I can't go back to school. I don't have parents. I don't have anything except," she gestured vaguely at the desert behind them, at the range, at everything Jack had given her. "This." Jack nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. "There's a way," he said. "It's not legal. It's not safe. And if it goes wrong, it could destroy you. But it's a way." "What way?" "The military." Emma laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I'm 15. You need to be 17 to enlist. 18 without parental consent. That's if you do it the right way." Jack reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. He held it for a moment, then set it on the seat between them. Inside that envelope is everything you need. Birth certificate, not yours. Social security card, not yours. Documents that say you're Emma Cole, 17 years old, graduated from a homeschool program in Arizona. Emma stared at the envelope like it might bite her. "Why would you do this?" "Because I've seen what happens to girls like you on the streets. And I've seen what you could become if someone gives you a chance." Jack's voice was rougher than usual. "You've got a gift, Emma. The kind of gift that belongs somewhere it can be used. The military will give you structure, purpose, a way to be dangerous that actually means something. And if I get caught, you'll be court-martialed, dishonorably discharged, possibly prosecuted for fraud. It'll be on your record forever. You're not making a great sales pitch." Jack almost smiled. "I'm not selling anything. I'm giving you a choice. Stay here. Survive on the streets until someone catches you or something worse happens. Or take a risk. Become something." Emma picked up the envelope. It felt heavier than it should. "If I do this," she said, "I can never come back, can I? To being Emma Sinclair. That girl is gone." "That girl has been gone for a while," Jack said quietly. "This is just making it official." Emma opened the envelope, looked at the documents inside. A birth certificate listing Emma Cole, born June 15th, making her 17 years and 4 months old. A social security card. A high school completion certificate. A new identity. A way out. "I need to think about it. Take all the time you need." "But kid," Jack reached out and put his hand on her shoulder, the first time he'd ever touched her deliberately. "Whatever you decide, you're not invisible anymore. Not to me. That counts for something." Emma didn't trust herself to speak. She got out of the truck and walked into the gathering dark, the envelope clutched against her chest, the weight of choice pressing down on her shoulders. 3 weeks later, she walked into an Army recruiting station with her new identity, and her stillness wrapped around her like armor. "I want to enlist," she said to the recruiter behind the desk. Today, Fort Benning, Georgia, was nothing like the California desert. Emma, Now Emma Cole to everyone who mattered, arrived in late spring, the humidity hitting her like a wet blanket the moment she stepped off the bus. The air was thick green, alive with insects and the smell of red clay. Basic training was designed to break people. Emma already knew what broken felt like. She watched recruits wash out in the first week, cry in their bunks, calling their parents, begging for release from contracts they'd signed without understanding. She watched drill sergeants scream until the veins stood out on their necks, their voices blending into a constant roar of demands and corrections. None of it touched her, not because she was tough, not because she was stronger than the others, but because she'd already lived through worse. What was a drill sergeant screaming in your face compared to being thrown out by your own mother? What was a 20-mile ruck march compared to sleeping in an abandoned building wondering if tonight was the night someone found you? Emma did what she'd always done. She went still. She watched. She learned. The physical training was hard, harder than anything Jack had put her through, but her body adapted. The mental games were harder still, the sleep deprivation and constant pressure designed to expose every weakness. But Emma's weaknesses had already been exposed. They'd been carved into her on the streets of Bakersfield, and she'd learned to seal them shut. She graduated basic training ranked fourth in her company. And then she did something that made everyone notice. You're applying for sniper school? The captain behind the desk looked at her like she'd lost her mind. You're barely out of basic. You don't have the time in service. You don't have the experience. I know how to shoot, Emma said. Everyone knows how to shoot. This is the Army. I really know how to shoot. Test me. Something in her voice, that absolute stillness, that complete absence of doubt, made the captain pause. You understand the washout rate? Sniper school takes the best shooters in the Army and sends half of them home. Yes, sir. You understand you'll be the only woman in the candidate pool? Yes, sir. The captain studied her for a long moment. Then he made a phone call. 2 weeks later, Emma was on a bus to the U.S. Army Sniper School. There were 28 candidates in her class, 27 men and her. The staff sergeant who greeted them made his position clear from the first minute. I don't care what's between your legs, he announced, pacing in front of the assembled candidates. I don't care who your daddy is. I don't care what you did before you got here. In this program, you are all equally worthless until you prove otherwise. 57% of you will wash out. Some of you will quit. Some of you will fail. And some of you will realize that you don't have what it takes to do this job. He stopped in front of Emma. What makes you think you belong here, Cole? Nothing, Staff Sergeant. Emma kept her eyes forward. I haven't proven anything yet. The Staff Sergeant grunted. At least you're not stupid. The first week was focused on stalking, the art of moving across open terrain without being detected. Emma lay in grass for 6 hours without moving, her ghillie suit soaked through with sweat, insects crawling across her face and hands, while observers scanned the field with high-powered optics. At 200 yards, the margin for error was 0. A single twitch, a single breath at the wrong moment, a single reflection of light off an exposed surface. Any of it would get you spotted. Any of it would fail you. Emma didn't twitch. She didn't breathe at the wrong moment. She became the ground itself. Where the hell did you learn to stalk like that? Her instructor demanded after the exercise. You went 6 hours without a single detection. I've had Marines fail that drill. Practice, Staff Sergeant. Practice where? Emma thought about the streets of Bakersfield, the alley, the 2 men, the way she'd learned to become invisible just to survive. Everywhere, she said. The marksmanship portion pushed her further than Jack ever had. At 1,000 yards, the bullet was in the air for nearly 2 seconds, an eternity during which wind, gravity, and the Coriolis effect could push it feet off target. She learned to calculate drift, to adjust for temperature and humidity, to account for the fact that the Earth itself was rotating beneath the bullet's trajectory. She learned that a shot at that distance wasn't really aiming at all. It was math. It was physics. It was becoming the bullet before you ever touched the trigger. 18 hours in a hide position. No movement. No bathroom breaks. Just stillness and observation, and the slow accumulation of intelligence about enemy positions. Emma thrived. The final qualification exercise lasted 36 hours. Most candidates quit at 20. By hour 30, only 14 remained. By the end, 12 people were still standing. Emma was one of them. She was the only woman to complete the course that year. She was also the youngest graduate in 6 years, though no one knew that because no one knew her real age. The staff sergeant found her after the graduation ceremony, when the other candidates were celebrating with their families, and Emma stood alone near the edge of the parade ground. Cole, staff sergeant. He looked at her the same way Jack Morrison had. That weighing look, that assessment of potential. You're going to Kandahar, he said. 3rd deployment rotation. You'll be attached to an infantry company as their designated marksman until you've got enough field time for a dedicated sniper assignment. Yes, staff sergeant. Don't die over there. You're too good a shooter to waste. Emma didn't smile, but something in her chest loosened slightly. I'll try not to, staff sergeant. Kandahar province in 2014 was a different kind of war. The major combat operations were winding down, but the fighting hadn't stopped. It had just changed shape. IEDs instead of conventional engagements. Small unit actions. Hearts and minds during the day. Terror in the night. Emma arrived at Forward Operating Base Vance with her M24 custom rifle, her kit bag, and 16 months of the most intensive training the U.S. Army could provide. She was 19 years old, though her documents said 21. She had never seen combat. She had never killed a human being. She was about to learn what that cost. Her spotter was a sergeant named Daniels, 10 years older, 3 deployments, the kind of soldier who'd seen enough to know what mattered and what didn't. He looked at her the same way everyone looked at her, with skepticism, curiosity, and the unspoken question of whether she actually belonged. First deployment? He asked on their second night at the FOB. Yes, Sergeant. You scared? Emma thought about it, really thought about it. I don't know what to be scared of yet. Daniels laughed, not mockingly, but with genuine surprise. That's either the smartest or the dumbest thing I've ever heard a boot say. I'm still figuring out which. Their first mission came 3 days later. An infantry patrol was moving through a village 6 kilometers south of the FOB. Intelligence suggested Taliban presence, but the nature of the threat was unclear. Emma and Daniels were positioned on a ridge overlooking the village, 700 meters out. Elevated position, clear sight lines. Eyes on. Daniels called through the radio, scanning the village with his rangefinder. Patrol is entering the market square. No hostile indicators. Emma watched through her scope. The village was quiet. Too quiet, maybe, but she didn't have enough experience to know what quiet meant in a place like this. Women drew water from a well. Children played near a burned-out truck. Men sat in doorways, watching the American patrol with expressions she couldn't read. Movement, Daniel said. Building at 10 o'clock. Second floor window. Emma tracked left, found the window, saw a shadow shift behind the curtain. Confirm, she said. I can't confirm. Could be civilian. Could be hostile. Watch and wait. They watched. The patrol moved through the square. The shadow didn't reappear. But something in Emma's gut was screaming. That animal instinct she developed on the streets. The one that had saved in the alley. The one that knew danger before her conscious mind could name it. Something's wrong, she said. Define wrong. I don't know. It just feels. The first shot came from the building at 10 o'clock. The second shot came from somewhere else, a rooftop to the east that neither of them had been watching. One of the infantry soldiers went down, clutching his shoulder, his scream audible even at 700 meters. Contact, Daniels shouted into the radio. Patrol under fire. Multiple hostiles. Emma swung her rifle toward the second floor window. The curtain was pulled back now. A man stood there, bearded, middle-aged, wearing a worn jacket. He had a rifle pressed against his shoulder, already tracking for his next target. 400 yards. Emma had made this shot 1,000 times in training. Wind speed, 8 miles per hour from the east. Distance, 400 yards. Target, center mass. Her finger rested on the trigger, and then she saw his face. Not a silhouette, not a paper target. A human face. Eyes squinted in concentration. Lines around his mouth. A scar on his left cheek. A person. A living, breathing human being who would stop existing the moment she squeezed the trigger. Emma hesitated. 3 seconds. It was only 3 seconds, but in combat, 3 seconds is a lifetime. The man fired again. Another soldier went down. This one hit in the leg, screaming as a squad mates dragged her behind cover. Emma's training finally overrode her humanity. She exhaled, found the pause between heartbeats, squeezed the trigger. The shot was perfect. Center mass, just like she practiced. Center mass, just like she practiced. The man in the window dropped, but the damage was done. The soldier who'd been hit in the shoulder, Private First Class Marcus Webb, would spend 6 months in recovery at Walter Reed. His rotator cuff was destroyed. His career as an infantryman was over because Emma had hesitated. 3 seconds. The debrief was brutal. You had the shot, her commanding officer said, not angry, but something worse, disappointed. You had eyes on the hostile before he engaged. Why didn't you fire? Emma stared at the wall behind him. I saw his face, sir. I saw him as a person, and I had to process that before I could fire. The silence that followed was heavier than any words could have been. Specialist Cole, the officer said finally, this job requires you to make decisions that will haunt you for the rest of your life. Every shot you take, every life you end, it stays with you. But hesitation doesn't save lives. It costs them. I understand, sir. Do you? He leaned forward. Because Private Webb's family is going to get a call telling them their son will never throw a football again. And the reason is that our sniper saw the enemy as a person instead of a threat. Emma didn't respond. There was nothing to say. That night, Sergeant Daniels found her sitting alone behind the communications bunker, her M24 disassembled on the ground in front of her, each piece laid out with surgical precision. You're thinking about quitting, he said. I'm thinking about what I am. And what are you? Emma looked at the rifle parts. Barrel, stock, bolt assembly, scope, individual components that were harmless on their own but lethal when combined. A weapon, she said. That's what I'm supposed to be. A weapon that doesn't hesitate. Daniel sat down next to her. You want to know what separates good snipers from the ones who wash out? He didn't wait for her answer. It's not accuracy. Plenty of accurate shooters can't do this job. It's compartmentalization. The ability to separate what you do from what you feel about it. How? In the field, you're a weapon. After the mission, you're human again. He picked up the bolt assembly, turned it over in his hands. You don't stop being a person, Cole. You just learn to put that person somewhere safe while you do what needs to be done. And the people I kill, you remember them. All of them. You carry them. Daniel set the bolt back down. But you carry them as weight, not as wounds. There's a difference. Emma requested additional training. She threw herself into drills with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. Every morning before dawn, she was at the range. Every night after dark, she was reviewing footage of her engagement, watching a moment of hesitation over and over, burning it into her memory as a reminder of what failure looked like. 7 seconds. That became her new standard. From target acquisition to trigger pull, 7 seconds. No more, no less. Sergeant Daniels ran her through scenario after scenario. Hostiles behind cover. Hostiles in crowds. Hostiles with civilians in the line of fire. Every iteration was designed to test her ability to separate the human being from the target, the face from the threat. She failed the first dozen times, but she kept going. Again, she would say after each failure, you need rest. Again, on the 19th iteration, something clicked. The scenario was complex. A hostile commander on a rooftop, 2 guards beside him, a civilian woman walking through the street below, wind at 12 miles per hour, distance at 500 yards, a shot window of less than 4 seconds before the commander moved behind cover. Emma went still, not the forced stillness of concentration, but the natural stillness she developed in that alley in Bakersfield, the stillness of someone who had accepted every possible outcome and found peace with all of them. She saw the commander. She saw the distance, the wind, the geometry of the shot. She did not see his face. She squeezed the trigger. Center mass. For seconds. That's it, Daniel said. That's what it's supposed to look like. But it wasn't enough. Emma spent the next 2 years rebuilding herself from the ground up. She deployed 3 more times. Kandahar, then Helmand, then a classified location she still couldn't name. Each deployment added to her record. Each engagement tested her ability to remain a weapon when everything human inside her screamed to hesitate. By the time she was 24, she had 23 confirmed kills. Each one lived inside her. Each one was weight, not wound. And then the call came that changed everything. Staff Sergeant Cole was summoned to a briefing room at Bagram Airfield with no explanation. Inside, she found 3 men in civilian clothes who carried themselves like operators and a woman in army dress uniform with no rank insignia and eyes that had seen too much. Staff Sergeant Cole, the woman said. Have a seat. Emma sat. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest level. If you breathe a word of this conversation to anyone, you will spend the rest of your life in a federal prison. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Good. The woman slid a folder across the table. 3 weeks from now, a SEAL team will be conducting an extraction operation in an urban environment. The target is a high-value intelligence asset, someone whose information could prevent multiple imminent attacks on American interests. Emma opened the folder. Maps, photographs, building layouts. The team will be exposed during the extraction. They need Overwatch. Specifically, they need a shooter who can make shots that the rest of us can't. Why me? Because we've been watching you. The woman's voice was flat, matter of fact. Your recovery from the web incident was remarkable. Your current accuracy rating is exceptional, and your psychological profile suggests you have the ability to compartmentalize in ways that most shooters can't. Emma looked at the maps again. The extraction route, the potential hostile positions, the geometry of the operation. What kind of shots are we talking about? The kind where the margin for error is measured in inches, not feet. The kind where a miss doesn't just mean mission failure. It means dead Americans. One of the civilian-dressed operators spoke up for the first time. We don't usually work with Army, but your reputation preceded you. The boys on the ground specifically requested someone with your profile. My profile? Someone who can go completely still under pressure, he said. Someone who won't flinch when the math gets complicated. Emma closed the folder. When do I leave? The target city was somewhere Emma still couldn't name. They infiltrated under cover of darkness. 12 operators in total, plus Emma as Overwatch. Her position was established 14 hours before the operation began. A rooftop 650 meters from the extraction point, with sight lines covering 3 of the 4 approaches. She lay in her hide position for the full 14 hours. No movement, no bathroom breaks, just stillness and observation, and the slow accumulation of intelligence about enemy positions. She marked 11 potential hostile positions, calculated wind drift for each, memorized the distances, prepared for scenarios she hoped wouldn't happen. At 0247 local time, the SEAL team began their approach. Emma watched through her scope as shadows moved through the city. The team was good, the best she'd ever worked with, but even the best could only do so much in hostile territory. The extraction point was a 3-story building on the eastern edge of the market district. The asset was being held on the 2nd floor. The plan was simple. Fast breach, faster extraction. Exfil before the enemy could respond. Plans rarely survive contact with the enemy. The team made entry at 0253. Emma heard the muffled sounds of suppressed gunfire through her earpiece, the sharp, professional sounds of controlled violence. Package secured, came the call. Moving to Exfil. That's when it went wrong. The first hostile appeared on a rooftop, 300 meters to her left. Then another. Within 30 seconds, Emma counted 9 armed fighters converging on the extraction point. Overwatch, this is Reaper 6. We got company. A lot of company. Emma's scope was already tracking. The first hostile was on a rooftop, RPG shouldered, preparing to fire on the team's exit route. Distance, 380 meters. Wind, 6 miles per hour from the northwest. She exhaled, found the pause, squeezed. The hostile dropped. Good shot, Reaper 6 called. We got 3 more on the east side, moving toward the alley. Emma racked her bolt, acquired the next target. Distance, 420 meters, partially obscured by a low wall. She adjusted for the wall, calculated the angle, fired, hit, 2 down. Keep them coming. The next 4 minutes were the most intense of Emma's life. She moved from target to target with mechanical precision. Each shot was a calculation. Distance, wind, elevation, the movement of the target, the position of friendlies. There was no time to think about faces. No time to see them as people, only as problems to be solved. 3 hostiles on the rooftop to the south. 2 more emerging from a building to the east. One setting up a machine gun position that would have shredded the extraction route. Emma's bolt worked in a continuous rhythm. Rack, acquire, breathe, fire. Rack, acquire, breathe, fire. At the 3-minute mark, she had 9 confirmed neutralizations. The team was almost clear. And then she saw him, a hostile commander on a rooftop, directly above the team's exfil vehicle. He had an RPG shouldered, the warhead pointed straight down. If he fired, the vehicle and everyone in it would be destroyed. Distance, 400 meters. The problem, Petty Officer Second Class Kowalski was climbing into the vehicle at that exact moment. His head was directly in Emma's line of fire. The angle was impossible, not the shot itself. Emma could make a 400-meter shot in her sleep, but the clearance, if she fired, the bullet would pass within inches of Kowalski's head. Any variation, a gust of wind, a slight tremor in her hand, an error in her calculation, and she would kill an American. Overwatch, we need that rooftop cleared. Now, Emma's heart was pounding. She could feel her pulse in her temples, in her fingertips, in the slight tremor that threatened to throw off her aim. Stillness. She had to go still. She thought about the alley in Bakersfield, the 2 men, the way she had made herself into nothing, into furniture, into air. She thought about Jack Morrison's voice. You go still. That's rare, kid. She thought about Sergeant Daniels. In the field, you're a weapon. Emma exhaled. The world narrowed to a single point. The hostile commander center mass. 400 meters away, the space between him and her bullet occupied by 18 inches of clearance next to an American skull. She found the pause between heartbeats, and she squeezed the trigger. The bullet crossed 400 meters in a fraction of a second. It passed 18 inches from Kowalski's left ear, close enough that he later said he felt the heat of its passage, and struck the hostile commander's center mass. The RPG fell from his hands. He collapsed backward onto the rooftop. Holy! Kowalski's voice crackled over the radio. Did you just... Rooftop clear, Emma said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. Everything was steady. Continue exfil. The team was clear 30 seconds later. The vehicle roared down the street and out of the city. The high-value asset was secured. 0 American casualties. 11 hostile combatants neutralized by a single shooter in under 3 minutes, including 1 shot that passed 18 inches from a friendly's head at 400 meters. The debrief was held at a classified location 36 hours later. Emma sat across from the same woman who had recruited her, the same 3 operators, and a Navy commander she'd never seen before. Staff Sergeant Cole, the commander said, I've been in special operations for 19 years. I've worked with the best shooters in the world. What you did in that city is something I've never seen before. Emma didn't respond. 11 shots in under 3 minutes. A clearance shot at 400 meters with less than 2 feet of margin. And not a single American casualty. The commander leaned forward. My boys are alive because of you. Kowalski is alive because of you. I did my job, sir. You did more than your job. The commander slid a folder across the table, different from the last one, thicker, with classification markings Emma didn't recognize. We want you to do it again, full time. Emma opened the folder. It was an offer, a transfer to a unit that didn't officially exist, doing operations that would never be acknowledged. Ghost work. The kind of missions where success meant no one ever knew you were there, and failure meant no one would ever find your body. We need shooters like you, the commander said. Shooters who can go places regular forces can't. Who can make impossible shots? Who can be the difference between success and catastrophe? And if I say no, then you go back to your current assignment. No hard feelings. But I think we both know you're not going to say no. He was right. Emma had spent her whole life searching for a place where she belonged. The streets of Bakersfield had tried to destroy her. The army had given her structure. Sniper school had given her purpose. But this was something else. This was being the best at something that mattered. When do I start? The commander smiled. You already have. Over the next 5 years, Emma conducted 17 classified operations across 12 countries. Each one was different. Each one required adaptation, improvisation, the application of skills she'd spent her entire life developing. She eliminated hostile commanders in urban environments. She provided overwatch for extraction operations in mountain terrain. She executed shots at distances that most shooters would consider impossible. She became a legend, not in the public sense, because public acknowledgement would have compromised every operation she'd ever participated in, but in the quiet, professional community of operators who knew what real excellence looked like. Other shooters requested her for their missions. Commanders specifically asked for her profile. When the impossible needed to happen, her name was the one that came up. But legends don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in the minds of the people who witnessed them. And Emma, who had spent her entire life trying to become invisible, was now someone that invisible men talked about in hushed voices. The weapon had become something more. She had become the answer to questions that couldn't be asked. Emma's last classified operation came 6 months before her 32nd birthday. The details were still compartmented. She couldn't discuss the location, the target, or the specifics of the engagement. But the outcome was a matter of record within the community. A hostage rescue operation that had been deemed low probability of success became a textbook example of precision shooting under impossible conditions. 3 hostages recovered, 12 hostile combatants neutralized, 0 friendly casualties. After the operation, Emma was called into a meeting with the unit commander, a different commander now, the third she'd served under in 5 years. Staff Sergeant Cole, he said, I have good news and bad news. Start with the bad news, sir. The bad news is that your medical evaluation came back flagged. You've been in continuous operational deployment for almost 6 years. The wear and tear is starting to show. The doctors are recommending a transition out of active operations. Emma had known this was coming. Her shoulder ached constantly now. Her vision wasn't quite what it had been. The cumulative effect of thousands of hours in hide positions, hundreds of shots fired, years of stress and sleep deprivation, and the constant weight of responsibility. And the good news? The good news is that you've earned the right to choose what comes next. The commander slid a set of papers across the desk. You can transition to training, help us develop the next generation of shooters. You can take a staff position, or you can separate with full honors and benefits. Emma looked at the papers. 6 years of ghost work, 17 missions, more confirmed kills than she could count without consulting a file she was no longer allowed to access. And now it was over. I need to think about it. Take all the time you need. Emma took 6 weeks. She spent the first 2 weeks at a rehabilitation facility, addressing the accumulated physical damage of her career. Physical therapy, medical evaluations, the slow, unglamorous process of healing. She spent the next 2 weeks visiting places she'd never had time to visit. The ocean, the mountains, cities where people walked around without constantly scanning rooftops for threats. She spent the final 2 weeks driving back to Bakersfield. The city hadn't changed much. The streets still ran the same way. The buildings still stood where she remembered them. The Sunrise Laundromat on Chester Avenue was still there, though it had a new sign and new owners. Emma parked her rental car in the lot and sat for a long moment, looking at the place where she had spent so many nights. 14 years old, 93 pounds, $43 in a backpack. The girl who had slept in that laundromat was gone, erased, transformed, replaced by the woman behind the wheel. But Emma could still feel her sometimes, in the quiet moments between missions, in the space between heartbeats before she squeezed a trigger. That girl had been terrified. That girl had been alone. That girl had learned stillness as a survival mechanism, never knowing that the same stillness would one day save the lives of America's most elite warriors. Emma got out of the car and walked inside. The layout was different now. New machines, new chairs, new fluorescent lights humming that familiar frequency. But the corner where she used to sit, the corner where she would fold herself into the smallest possible space and pretend to wait for a dryer that wasn't hers, that corner was still there. She stood in that corner for 17 minutes. Not because she was waiting for anything. Not because she was hoping for a last-minute rescue. But because her body needed to be there one more time to close a loop that had been open for 18 years. Then she got back in the car and drove to Jack Morrison's gun range. The property was overgrown now. The corrugated metal shed was rusted. The targets were still there, refrigerator doors and car panels, faded and weathered, but no one had shot at them in years. Jack had died 4 years ago. Emma had learned about it through unofficial channels, the way she learned about most things. Heart attack, peaceful as death went. He'd been 73 years old and had outlived his wife by 11 years. He'd never known what Emma became. He'd never known that the 15-year-old girl he taught to shoot would one day be the shooter that SEAL team specifically requested for impossible operations. He'd never known that his gift, the sleeping bag, the food, the training, the forged documents, had created something legendary. But maybe he had known. Maybe that's why he'd done it. Emma walked to the 300-yard line, where she'd first fired the Remington 700. The ground was the same. The view was the same. The wind still blew from the east at 8 miles per hour. Give or take. "Thank you," she said to the empty air. The wind carried her voice across the desert. She stood there until the sun began to set. Then she drove to the house. Dale Harper's house. The house where she'd been abandoned. The house with the cracked concrete porch and the rain-streaked window. It looked smaller than she remembered. Shabbier. The kind of house that people stopped caring about a long time ago. A light was on inside. Emma didn't knock. She didn't need to confront Dale Harper. Didn't need revenge or acknowledgement or closure. The man who had thrown her out was irrelevant now. A footnote in a story that had grown far beyond anything he could have imagined. She just stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the porch where she'd stood in the rain 18 years ago. 14 years old. 93 pounds, $43 in a threadbare backpack. The girl who had stood there was terrified, alone, abandoned. The woman who stood there now was something else entirely. Emma Sinclair had been thrown away, and she had built herself into something no one could ever throw away again. She turned her back on the house and walked her car. The sunrise was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. Emma drove toward it, toward the life she had earned, toward the peace she had finally found, toward whatever came next. Behind her, the streets of Bakersfield faded into memory. Ahead of her, the road stretched out like a promise. Staff Sergeant Emma Cole, United States Army. Ghost operator. Legend. The shooter the impossible calls for. She was finally home. The desert wind still blows across Jack Morrison's abandoned range. The targets still stand at 300 yards, faded and weathered but unchanged in their purpose. The corrugated metal shed still catches the afternoon sun, throwing long shadows across the packed dirt, where a teenage girl once learned that stillness was more than survival. Stillness was power. Stillness was precision. Stillness was the difference between hesitation and execution, between failure and success, between the girl who was thrown away and the woman who became the answer. Emma understood that now. She understood that every moment of her life, every cold night in the laundromat, every hour in the hide position, every shot she'd taken, and every face she refused to see, had been preparation for the person she was meant to become. The streets had tried to break her. The military had tried to reshape her. The classified world had tried to use her. But through all of it, the stillness remained. Not the stillness of passivity, not the stillness of surrender, but the stillness of absolute presence, the stillness of someone who had accepted every possible outcome and found peace with all of them. Jack Morrison had seen it first. You go still. That's rare, kid. That's very rare. He had been right. And his gift, not just a training, but the recognition of what she could become, had rippled outward through 18 years of transformation until it touched the lives of operators who would never know his name, hostages who would never know she existed, and enemies who never saw the shot that ended them. Emma Sinclair was 32 years old. She had 23 confirmed kills before her ghost operations. She had 17 classified missions across 12 countries. She had made shots that other shooters considered impossible. And she had finally returned to the place where it all began, not with bitterness, but with peace. The abandoned girl had become the legend. The throwaway had become the irreplaceable. And the stillness that had once been her only defense was now the gift she would pass on to the next generation of shooters, the next generation of survivors, the next generation of weapons who would learn what she had learned. In the field, you're a weapon. After the mission, you're human again. Emma climbed back into her car as the sun rose over Bakersfield. Behind her was the past, the streets, the laundromat, the abandoned range, the house where she'd been thrown away. Ahead of her was the future, training the next generation, building the next legends, ensuring that the gift she received would continue to save lives long after she was gone. She was finally home, and she was finally at peace. Emma Sinclair's story shows us that transformation doesn't require permission. It requires decision. If this kept you engaged, hit that like button. Tell me in the comments, would you have been able to make that shot 18 inches from a friendly's head at 400 meters? Subscribe if you haven't already. More stories like this are coming. See you in the next one.